Many people around the world believe that English is one of the hardest languages to learn. They spend years studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, translating every sentence inside their minds, and worrying about pronunciation mistakes. Some learners become so afraid of speaking incorrectly that they stop trying completely. Every mistake feels embarrassing. Every difficult word feels like another wall standing in front of them. Slowly, they begin believing that fluency belongs only to talented people, highly educated students, or those who grow up speaking English from childhood. But the truth is much simpler than most people realize. English is not as difficult as people imagine. In many cases, the real problem is not the language itself. The real problem is the way people try to learn it. When learning feels stressful, boring, and full of pressure, the brain becomes tired very quickly. But when learning feels natural, emotional, and enjoyable, the brain starts absorbing language much faster. This is why stories have such incredible power. A good story does not feel like studying. It feels like living inside another world. And while the mind enjoys the journey, it quietly learns new words, sentence patterns, emotions, and expressions without fear. That is why stories can change everything for an English learner. For a long time, many learners believed that fluency could only come from difficult textbooks and endless grammar exercises. Every day looked the same. Open the notebook, memorize new words, repeat grammar structures, solve exercises, translate sentences, forget most of it the next day. The process felt heavy and exhausting. Some students studied for years but still became nervous during simple conversations. Their minds froze whenever someone spoke English unexpectedly. Even learners who understood grammar perfectly often struggled to speak naturally because their brains were trained to analyze language instead of experiencing it. Every sentence became a puzzle instead of communication. Every conversation became a test instead of a connection between people. Over time, frustration replaced excitement. Motivation became weaker. Many learners secretly wondered if they were simply too slow to become fluent. Yet deep inside, they still hoped for something that could finally make English feel easier. One day, something small began to change. Instead of opening another grammar book, a learner picked up a simple English story. The sentences were short. The vocabulary was easy. There were no difficult exercises waiting at the end of each chapter. At first, it seemed too simple to be useful. But after reading a few pages, something unusual happened. The mind stopped worrying about rules for a moment. Instead of translating every word, the reader became curious about the story itself. The characters felt real. The emotions felt clear. The brain wanted to know what would happen next. Without realizing it, the learner continued reading longer than expected. 10 pages became 20. 20 became 50. And for the first time in a long while, English did not feel painful. It felt interesting. As days passed, the learner noticed small but powerful changes. Certain phrases started appearing naturally in the mind. Some sentence structures became familiar without memorization. Vocabulary words that once seemed difficult suddenly felt easy to understand because they were connected to emotions and situations inside the story. Reading no longer felt like hard work. It became a daily habit, almost like watching a favorite series or listening to music. The learner did not force the brain to remember words anymore. The brain remembered them automatically because stories create emotional connections, and emotional connections strengthen memory. This is one of the biggest secrets behind language learning. Human beings remember feelings much longer than isolated information. A grammar rule may disappear from memory after a few days, but a powerful story can remain inside the mind for years. Slowly, confidence began growing in unexpected ways. During conversations, sentences started forming faster. Fear became weaker. The learner no longer paused after every word to think about grammar formulas. Mistakes still happened sometimes, but they no longer felt terrifying. That change was extremely important because fear is one of the greatest enemies of fluency. When people are afraid of making mistakes, their minds become tense. Tension blocks natural communication. But when people relax and focus on meaning instead of perfection, language begins flowing more naturally. Stories help create that relaxed mental state because stories teach language through understanding rather than pressure. Instead of treating English like a school subject filled with rules, stories treat English like a living experience. Many learners eventually discover that children become fluent faster for a very simple reason. Children do not begin with grammar books. They begin with stories, conversations, cartoons, songs, emotions, and repetition. They hear the same phrases again and again in meaningful situations until the language becomes natural. They are not afraid of sounding imperfect. They speak even when they make mistakes. Adults often forget this important truth. They become trapped inside fear and overthinking. They believe they must master every grammar rule before speaking confidently. But real fluency does not grow from perfection. It grows from exposure, repetition, patience, and communication. Stories naturally provide all these things at the same time. Eventually, the learner who once struggled to speak English found something even more valuable than fluency: freedom. English no longer felt like a test waiting to judge every mistake. It became a tool for connection, learning, entertainment, and opportunity. Conversations became enjoyable instead of frightening. Reading became relaxing instead of exhausting. Most importantly, the learner stopped feeling ashamed of imperfections. That emotional freedom opened the door to faster improvement because confidence allows the mind to communicate naturally. People often underestimate how important emotions are during language learning. A fearful brain learns slowly. A relaxed and curious brain learns quickly. This is why the right story can completely change someone's English journey. Stories remove pressure. They make learners forget they are studying. They transform vocabulary into emotion, grammar into experience, and practice into enjoyment. Instead of forcing information into memory, stories invite the mind to participate naturally. And when learning becomes natural, fluency no longer feels impossible. It becomes achievable step by step, page by page, conversation by conversation. So whenever English feels difficult, remember this simple truth. The problem may not be your intelligence, your memory, or your ability. The problem may simply be the method. You do not need to become perfect overnight. You do not need to know every grammar rule before speaking. You do not need to sound exactly like native speakers. What you truly need is patience, daily exposure, and learning that feels alive instead of painful. A simple story can sometimes teach more than hours of stressful studying because stories connect directly with the human heart and mind. And once that connection begins, learning becomes much easier than you ever imagined. English is not hard. Sometimes you just need the right story.